Mark Johnson had never been the kind of man to chase fame or power. At 36, he had worked quietly and diligently at Verontech, a mid-sized but fast-growing software firm, for over 12 years. While many of his colleagues played politics and kissed up to upper management, Mark believed in just one thing: doing the right thing. He wasn't flashy. He didn't gossip in the break room. He wasn't the type to hang out with the CEO during after-work drinks. But what he lacked in charm, he made up for in integrity and results. His code was clean, his projects delivered ahead of schedule, and when something went wrong, he didn't make excuses, he fixed it. That Monday morning started like any other. Coffee in hand, Mark sat at his desk to review a back-end report from a third-party vendor. But something caught his eye. The numbers were off. Not just a little. Wildly. Payments were being made to a supplier called Orbit Solutions, a name he had never heard of. Curious, he began to dig. The more he looked, the more confused he became. Orbit Solutions had no real online presence, no company profile, and no history. Yet Verontech had paid them over $1.2 million in the past 8 months. Mark's heart started to race. Was it a typo? A mistake? Or something worse? He pulled archived invoices, matched them to project records, and cross-referenced them with internal purchase orders. What he uncovered was chilling. Orbit Solutions was fake, a shell company created with falsified paperwork. Someone inside the company was funneling money, hiding behind this ghost vendor. Mark took a deep breath. Most people would have shut the file, cleared their search history, and walked away. But Mark wasn't like most people. That evening, instead of heading straight home, he stayed late and gathered every document he could. Invoices, emails, spreadsheets. He compiled it all into a single encrypted folder and saved it to a flash drive. He didn't know who was behind this. But he knew he couldn't ignore it. Before leaving, he emailed his manager, Paul Donovan, and asked for a private meeting the next day. Mark arrived early the next morning. He hadn't slept much. His thoughts were haunted by worst-case scenarios. Was he about to expose something massive? Would he be celebrated or destroyed for doing the right thing? At 9:30 a.m. sharp, he knocked on Paul Donovan's office door. Paul, the senior operations manager and a man known for his cold efficiency, barely looked up. "Mark. Sit." Mark sat down, gripping the flash drive in his pocket like a lifeline. "Thanks for meeting with me, Paul. There's something I need to bring to your attention. I believe there's a major issue with one of our vendors." Paul's brow furrowed slightly, but his expression remained unreadable. "Go on." Mark took a deep breath. "I found multiple payments made to a company called Orbit Solutions. They've received over $1.2 million in the past 8 months, but the company doesn't exist. There's no public profile, no record of services, and the addresses listed on the invoices are fake. I cross-checked everything. This vendor is a ghost." He slid a printed folder across the desk with some of the key documents inside. Paul didn't open it. Instead, he leaned back, interlocking his fingers over his chest. "You've been doing some serious digging, haven't you?" Paul said calmly. Mark nodded. "Yes. And I think we need to escalate this to corporate compliance. There's a real chance this is embezzlement, or worse." For a brief moment, Paul just stared at him. The room went quiet. The silence was unnerving. Then, Paul smiled, but it wasn't the kind of smile you wanted to see. It was tight, forced, and hiding something. "Mark, I appreciate your diligence. You've always been thorough. But I want you to let this go. I'm telling you this as a friend, there are some things that don't need fixing." Mark blinked. "Excuse me?" Paul leaned forward, voice low but firm. "You don't know who's involved. What you found, if you push it, could make your life very complicated. Sometimes it's best to stay in your lane." Mark's stomach turned. "So, you're saying I should ignore $1 million fraud?" "I'm saying this conversation never happened." Mark stood up, stunned. "I can't do that." Paul exhaled and stood as well. Then I'll have to notify senior leadership that your behavior is becoming disruptive. That you're creating a toxic atmosphere and harassing other departments. Mark stared at him. You'd go that far to cover this up? Paul's expression didn't change. You're a smart guy, Mark. But sometimes, smart guys do dumb things. Mark left the office with a storm in his chest. He'd hoped for support. Instead, he got threatened. He walked straight to the company parking lot, sat in his car, and stared ahead for a long moment. His career, his livelihood, everything was now on the line. But he knew one thing for sure. He was not letting this go. Mark sat in his car for nearly an hour that morning. Thoughts spiraled through his mind like a hurricane. His job was on the line. His reputation. Maybe even his safety. But walking away from the truth? That had never been an option for him. He drove straight home instead of returning to his desk. If Paul was serious about reporting him for disruption, then showing up unannounced could only make things worse. Mark needed a plan, a safe, legal, and smart plan. Once in his apartment, he locked the door, drew the curtains, and booted up his personal laptop. He copied the contents of his encrypted folder to a new drive, then backed it up to a secure cloud server using a hidden email he'd created years ago when working freelance. He wasn't taking any chances. Mark knew going to the company's internal HR or compliance department was risky, they might already be compromised. So instead, he reached out to a contact, Julia Burns, a former college classmate turned investigative journalist. Julia now wrote for the National Scope, a respected outlet known for exposing corporate corruption. They hadn't spoken in years, but Mark still had her email from a student project. He hesitated for a moment, then composed a short, professional message. Subject: potential corporate fraud, confidential source. Hey Julia. I hope you're well. I've come across serious documentation of internal embezzlement at a mid-sized tech company. Payments made to a fake vendor totaling over $1 million. I have physical and digital evidence. I'm willing to speak off the record for now. Let me know if this is something your team would be interested in. Best. Mark Johnson. He hit send. A lump formed in his throat. The next few hours were a blur. He paced his apartment, checked his email every 5 minutes, and replayed the conversation with Paul in his mind on loop. At around 4 p.m., his phone vibrated. It was an unknown number. He hesitated before answering. Hello? Mark? This is Julia Burns. Her voice was exactly as he remembered it, firm, clear, and confident. I just read your email, she continued. You're serious about this? Mark nodded, then realized she couldn't see him. Yes. I wouldn't have contacted you if I wasn't. All right, she said. I need to verify what you have, but from what you described, this could be big. Really big. Are you ready for what this might turn into? Mark closed his eyes. I think I am. Good. Send me everything you've got, securely. We'll treat you as an anonymous source until you say otherwise. And Mark, thank you for trusting me. They hung up. He immediately sent her the encrypted folder, along with a short overview of how he found the fraud. Then, he sat down at his kitchen table and exhaled for the first time all day. He had just taken the first step toward exposing a $1 million cover-up. There was no turning back now. The next morning, Mark arrived at Veronteca's headquarters knowing it might be his last day there. He had barely slept. The adrenaline from sending Julia the evidence hadn't worn off, and a cold dread lingered in his chest. When he scanned his badge at the front entrance, the security guard gave him a strange look. Mark offered a polite smile, pretending not to notice. Something was off. The air felt heavier, like everyone knew something he didn't. As he walked to his floor, a few coworkers avoided eye contact. Sarah from marketing gave him a sympathetic glance, then quickly turned away. Mark's gut tightened. 5 minutes after logging into his computer, he received a meeting invite, immediate, no explanation, from HR. The location, Executive Conference Room 4D. He already knew what was coming. Mark entered the room to find Paul Donovan seated with two others, Rachel from HR and a legal counsel from the company. No one smiled. Rachel cleared her throat. "Mark, please have a seat." He obeyed silently. Rachel opened a folder. "We've been made aware of several concerning behaviors over the past few weeks. Your unauthorized access to vendor invoices, your late-night activity in restricted financial folders, and your interaction with senior management have raised flags." Mark clenched his jaw. "So, I'm being punished for doing my job?" Paul interrupted, voice cool. "You went beyond your scope. You accessed confidential records outside your clearance. That's a violation of company policy." Mark laughed bitterly. "You mean I found the fraud you're trying to hide?" Rachel's eyes widened, and Paul leaned forward. "Watch yourself, Mark. This is a formal meeting." The legal counsel spoke for the first time. "Due to your conduct, we are terminating your employment effective immediately. Your severance will be withheld pending a full internal review. Security will escort you to collect your belongings." Mark stood, keeping his voice calm. "You're firing me for being honest. For trying to stop corruption." Rachel looked uncomfortable but didn't respond. Paul, however, smirked. "We're firing you for breaking protocol. Your integrity? That's not part of your job description." Two security guards entered the room. One gestured toward the door. "Sir, please come with us." Mark looked around at the three faces, none of them surprised, none of them remorseful. He shook his head. "You'll regret this." He left the building escorted by security, his box of office belongings in hand. In the parking lot, he stood still for a moment, staring up at the glass walls of the company he had devoted 12 years of his life to. 12 years. Gone in 20 minutes. But what they didn't know, what made Mark smile, even in that devastating moment, was that Julia had already called him earlier that morning. "Mark, we're going to run this story. My editor's in. This is the real deal." And with that thought, Mark climbed into his car, turned the ignition, and whispered to himself, "Now let's see who really gets fired." Mark sat alone in his living room, watching the sun rise through half-open blinds. A dull ache throbbed in his chest. The anger from his firing was still fresh, but so was the quiet, growing thrill that something big was coming. At 8 a.m. sharp, his phone buzzed with a message from Julia. "We're live." Mark didn't wait. He opened the National Scopes website. The headline struck like a hammer. Whistleblower exposes multi-million-dollar fraud inside Verontech, fake vendors, hidden accounts, and executive silence. Underneath, a subhead read, "A former employee turned whistleblower has revealed damning evidence of financial misconduct inside one of the fastest-growing tech firms in the country." Mark's heart raced. There it was. Everything. Laid out in detail. Julia had done an exceptional job. The article detailed the fake company, Orbit Solutions, and how it had received over $1.2 million in fabricated payments. She carefully explained how a mid-level engineer had uncovered the scam while reviewing vendor data, and how his attempts to report it internally were silenced. She included copies of redacted invoices, screenshots of internal emails, and metadata logs from the payment system. Nothing traceable back to Mark directly, but all of it undeniably real. And then came the part Mark had expected, but still found hard to read. Following his internal complaint, the whistleblower was terminated under vague claims of disruptive behavior, prompting questions about retaliation and cover-up. Within an hour, the article began to spread. It hit Reddit, Hacker News, LinkedIn. Mark's phone buzzed non-stop with unknown numbers, journalist inquiries, and LinkedIn requests from people he hadn't spoken to in years. He ignored them all. He turned on the TV. Major networks were already covering it. Business anchors were quoting Julia's article. One channel showed a photo of Verontech's headquarters with bold red text, "Corporate fraud allegations rock tech firm." Then, A news update interrupted the segment. This just in, Veronteca's board of directors has issued a statement saying they are launching an internal investigation and placing several executives, including operations director Paul Donovan, on administrative leave. Mark nearly dropped his coffee mug. He sat down hard on the couch. Paul was out. The man who tried to silence him had just been publicly suspended. He opened Twitter, typed quickly, and posted. "I lost my job for being honest. But I got the truth out. That's enough for me." In minutes, it went viral. Thousands of likes. Retweets. Replies of support. Strangers calling him a hero. Former coworkers messaging him in private, saying they were proud, but scared to speak up. Mark didn't care about revenge anymore. He cared that people knew the truth. And now, they did. He looked out the window again. The sun was higher. The sky clearer. For the first time in weeks, Mark allowed himself to smile for real. By midday, Mark was no longer just a whistleblower, he was a trending name across every major platform. News sites had picked up the story, influencers were discussing corporate retaliation, and ex-employees of Verontech were coming forward with their own stories. Mark sat at his kitchen table, barely able to keep up with the flood of messages. Some were journalists asking for interviews. Others were tech workers thanking him for his courage. A few were even from anonymous insiders at Verontech. "You were right about Orbit Solutions. That wasn't the only fake vendor." One message read. Another said. "Donovan's been playing dirty for years. You just blew it all up." Mark realized this was bigger than he had thought. But while the outside world celebrated his bravery, behind closed doors at Verontech, chaos was erupting. According to a leaked internal memo that Julia forwarded to him, the board had ordered an emergency audit of all vendor payments from the last 5 years. Several executives had been pulled into closed-door meetings, and employees were being warned not to speak to the press. Mark's phone rang. It was Julia. "Hey," he said, answering quickly. "You watching the news?" she asked. "No." "What's up?" "They just confirmed Paul Donovan has resigned effective immediately." No statement. Just a quiet exit. Mark leaned back in his chair. "Wow." Julia continued, "But get this, they're now investigating the CFO too. Apparently, more shell companies are popping up in the books. This thing's a full-on house of cards." Mark didn't respond right away. His mind was racing. What had started as a single red flag had turned into a full-blown scandal. "Look," Julia added, "my editor thinks there's a part 2 to this story. We want to go deeper, interview former staff, dig into the financials, maybe even a full documentary down the line. You in?" Mark hesitated. He was just an engineer. A quiet guy. He didn't crave the spotlight. But something had changed in him. He had been wronged. Fired. Humiliated. And now, vindicated. "Yeah," he finally said. "I'm in." They hung up, and Mark's mind began racing with possibilities. Then, just as he began to relax, his phone lit up again. Unknown number. He let it ring, but then curiosity got the better of him. He picked up. "Mark Johnson," a deep voice asked. "Yes?" "This is Daniel Graves. I represent a private venture firm. We'd like to speak to you about a potential advisory role. Your courage, and your insight, are the kind of leadership we value." Mark's eyes widened. "What?" "We're forming a new tech security think tank," Daniel continued. "And we think someone like you could help us build it. Full autonomy. Great pay. Ethics-first culture. You don't have to decide now, but we'd love to talk more." Mark sat there, stunned. In less than 48 hours, he'd gone from being fired and disgraced to receiving job offers from people he had never dreamed of reaching. And it all started because he told the truth. Mark didn't sleep that night, not out of stress, but because his mind wouldn't stop racing. He sat on his balcony, watching the city glow under the stars. Somewhere, someone at Verontech was scrambling. Someone else was packing up their office in silence. Maybe even wiping hard drives. But the truth was out now, and nothing could unring the bell. Around 3 a.m., Mark finally collapsed onto the couch and dozed off. By the next morning, the story had evolved even more. Second executive resigns at Verontech amid ongoing fraud probe. Former whistleblower gains hero status among tech workers nationwide. Ethics in tech, is this the reckoning? Mark chuckled bitterly at that last headline. He never wanted to be the face of some movement, but he was glad the conversation was happening. As he scrolled through notifications, an unexpected message stopped him cold. Paul Donovan has sent you a message. His former boss. The man who fired him. Who smirked while security escorted him out. Mark clicked it. Mark. I doubt you'll respond, but I wanted to say, you were right. I didn't start it. I was told to look the other way. But I should have stopped it. I've lost everything now, my job, my reputation, maybe even my family. If you think I deserve it, fine. But I just needed to say it. I'm sorry. Paul. Mark sat there, blinking. He didn't know what to feel. Anger? Satisfaction? Pity? The truth was, Paul had gone along with it. He'd chosen the easy path. And when Mark tried to fix it, Paul tried to destroy him. An apology didn't erase that. Still, Mark didn't reply. Not yet. Later that day, while making coffee, another unexpected knock came at his door. He opened it and stood face to face with Sarah, one of the few colleagues who'd always been kind to him, but hadn't spoken up when he was fired. Hey, she said nervously. I'm sorry to show up unannounced. I had to see you. Mark raised an eyebrow. What's going on? I wanted to thank you, she said quickly. Everyone at the office is talking about what you did. We were scared. We still are. But seeing you stand up like that? It gave people courage. They're looking at the place differently now. Mark softened. Thanks, Sarah. That means a lot. She hesitated, then looked down. I also wanted to tell you something. Orbit Solutions wasn't the only vendor. There's another one, Prime Access Holdings. And I think it's connected to someone in the legal department. Mark's eyes narrowed. Sarah looked up. I don't know what you're going to do next, but if you're going to keep fighting, you won't be alone this time. She handed him a flash drive. Everything I've got. Be careful, Mark. And with that, she left. Mark stood in the doorway, stunned. He wasn't done. There were still ghosts in the machine. And now, he wasn't the only one hunting them. Mark sat at his desk, Sarah's flash drive plugged into his laptop. He stared at the folder labeled Prime Access _Holdings like it was radioactive. Part of him didn't want to open it. He was finally being seen as a hero, respected, vindicated. Did he really want to wade back into the dirt? But the bigger part of him, the one that couldn't walk away from the truth, clicked open the folder. It was worse than he expected. The documents included a pattern of small, almost invisible payments made over the past 6 years. Unlike Orbit Solutions' blatant invoices, these were subtle, split between various departments, coded under consulting, legal fees, and compliance support. Together, they added up to $4.7 million. Mark's heart pounded. There were names. Internal emails. Legal memos signed off by Verontech's chief legal officer, Hannah Wilkes, a woman Mark had only met a few times, but who was rumored to be close with the CFO. Mark realized something chilling: this wasn't just Paul Donovan's doing. Orbit Solutions had been the smokescreen. Prime Access was the engine. That afternoon, he sent everything to Julia, along with a message. This is bigger than we thought. Prime Access connects to legal. Possibly even the CFO. See attached. Julia replied instantly. This is explosive. Sit tight, we're pulling together a second exposé. This could shake the company to its core. Mark paced his apartment, filled with both dread and energy. He wanted justice, but he knew now that exposing one scam had only peeled back the surface of a deeper, more entrenched rot. 2 hours later, Julia called him. "This changes everything," she said, voice sharp. "We're now hearing whispers from internal sources that Veronteca's CEO may have signed off on some of this. There's talk of a federal investigation." Mark nearly dropped the phone. "You serious?" "Dead serious," she replied. "We're coordinating with other outlets now. This might go beyond Verontech. If Primaxis worked with other companies, this could be national." Mark exhaled hard. "What do you need from me?" "Just stay ready. You're about to become more than a whistleblower." That night, Mark stared out his window again, but the view felt different. The city looked sharper. Louder. Like the whole world was on edge. Then his phone buzzed again, this time with an encrypted message from a private number. "You're making powerful enemies. Stop before it's too late." Mark froze. He read it 3 times. There was no signature. No trace. Someone was watching. And they weren't pleased. But Mark didn't flinch. He took a screenshot, forwarded it to Julia, and whispered to himself. "Then let them come." Mark knew the message wasn't a bluff. It wasn't some random troll or disgruntled coworker. This was a real warning, from someone deep inside the network he was unraveling. He double-checked all his passwords, re-encrypted his cloud backups, and added 2-factor authentication on every device he owned. He even installed a small webcam cover and unplugged his smart speaker. Paranoia? Maybe. But after what he'd seen, it felt necessary. Later that evening, Julia called again, her voice more serious than usual. "Mark, we just got word from one of our contacts at the Department of Justice. They've opened a formal inquiry into Verontech." Mark's eyes widened. "Already?" "Yes. The articles reach, your documents, and now Sarah's evidence. This isn't just a company scandal anymore. They're looking at possible wire fraud, embezzlement, obstruction, and even racketeering." Mark exhaled. "And what about me?" "You're protected, for now. You're the key witness. But this is going to get noisy." As if on cue, Mark's phone vibrated again. This time it was an email. Subject: "You need to stop." Mark stared at it, his pulse rising. "You've made your point. You've destroyed careers. But if you push further, there will be consequences. Legal and personal. You've been warned." He didn't reply. Instead, he forwarded it straight to Julia and her legal team. If they were trying to intimidate him, they picked the wrong guy. The next morning, the National Scope released the second bombshell article. Second wave of fraud at Verontech, legal department implicated in $4.7 million shell scheme. The article blew the lid off everything. It connected Primaxis to several legal memos, signed off by Hannah Wilkes, and detailed how internal procedures had been manipulated to funnel company money into non-existent services. The news spread like wildfire, again. This time, federal agents were photographed entering Verontech headquarters. The company's stock plummeted by 34% in a single day. The CEO went silent. Hannah Wilkes' LinkedIn disappeared. Her corporate bio was scrubbed. Mark sat in silence as he watched the live coverage. His name wasn't mentioned, Julia's team was still protecting his identity, but he saw his fingerprints all over this wave of justice. Then, something unexpected happened. His phone rang. It was his father. They hadn't spoken in over a year, ever since Mark turned down a high-paying job at a shady firm his dad had arranged. They argued. Harsh words were said. But now... "Mark," his dad's voice cracked. "I saw the news. I'm proud of you, son." Mark felt something tighten in his chest. He hadn't realized how badly he'd needed to hear that. "Thanks, Dad," he whispered. "That means everything." That night, Mark allowed himself one moment of peace. But it didn't last. Another email came in, this one encrypted, from an anonymous source. You found Orbit Solutions. You uncovered Primaxis. But you're still missing the one at the top. Attached was a spreadsheet with a single name highlighted repeatedly across multiple files. CEO Richard Kessler. Mark stared at it, chills running down his spine. He had exposed 2 layers of corruption. But now, it was clear. The real kingpin hadn't fallen, yet. Mark stared at the spreadsheet for a long time. Dozens of payments. Multiple fake vendors. Each trail led to one name at the authorization level, Richard Kessler, the CEO of Verontech. If the file was legit, and Mark felt deep in his gut that it was, then the corruption went all the way to the top. Kessler hadn't just overlooked the schemes. He'd signed off on them. Mark sent the file to Julia instantly, along with a message. This is it. The final piece. By now, the National Scope had a team of investigative journalists working full-time on the case. Within hours, they verified the document's authenticity. The spreadsheet was part of a larger audit trail previously hidden under executive-level encryption, until a silent source within the finance department leaked it anonymously. Julia called Mark that night. Mark, it's done. We're running the final story at midnight. But I have to warn you, this one's going to make global headlines. When this drops, Kessler's finished. Mark nodded slowly. Then let's finish it. At 12:01 a.m., the headline exploded across the internet. Exclusive, Verontech CEO implicated in multi-year fraud scheme, whistleblower evidence triggers federal indictment. By sunrise, Verontech's stock had fallen another 40%. The company disabled public comments. A spokesperson issued a brief statement. CEO Richard Kessler has stepped down, effective immediately. We are cooperating fully with federal investigators. Mark couldn't believe it. The man who had once stood on stage, accepting innovation awards, giving TED Talks, smiling in magazine covers, was now under federal indictment for embezzlement, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. Over the next few weeks, the ripples only grew. The SEC launched a sweeping audit of other tech firms tied to Primaxis and Orbit Solutions. 4 more executives were arrested. Verontech's board resigned en masse and a new independent leadership team was brought in. Major publications ran editorials about corporate ethics, calling it the Mark Johnson effect. Mark's name, once buried in the shadows, was now being spoken with reverence in tech circles, ethics forums, and business schools. He finally agreed to a live interview with Julia. Dressed simply, Mark sat across from her in a quiet studio. She asked, looking back, "Do you regret anything?" Mark paused. "I regret that I had to do it. I regret that so many people were willing to lie, to steal, to hurt others for a little more money. But standing up? Telling the truth? No. I'll never regret that." The video went viral within hours. Millions watched it. Thousands messaged him. And then, the final twist. Mark accepted the offer from Daniel Graves, the venture firm that wanted to build an ethics-first tech think tank. Not for the salary, but for the mission. His first initiative? Creating a whistleblower support network to protect people like him in companies around the world. Because Mark knew something most people didn't. It only takes one voice to break the silence. But it takes many to change the system. And thanks to Mark Johnson, that change had finally begun.